Have you ever woken up in the woods and realized you were not alone, even though you could not see who was watching you? I used to think scary stories were just that, stories. Something to pass around a campfire or post on late-night forums. But out on the Appalachian Trail, where the nights stretch longer than you expect and silence feels heavier than it should, stories can take on a different meaning. I will never forget the night I woke to see them. Dozens of eyes glowing in the trees, watching, waiting, silent. I set out on the Appalachian Trail to find something simple: solitude, peace, and empowerment. The trail runs through more than 2,000 miles of the Appalachian Mountains and forests, twisting through states where history and folklore cling to the land like vines. People hike it for adventure, some for escape, and some to say they conquered one of the longest trails in the world. For me, it was about the freedom. During the day, the trail is alive in its own way. The crunch of boots on dirt, the wind shifting through the leaves, the chatter of birds overhead. But once the sun starts dipping behind the ridge, that life seems to drain away. You begin to notice how big the forest really is, and how small you feel inside it. On my first day hiking, I kept telling myself I was fine, just another hiker out here, like the countless others who had walked the same path. Still, there were moments when I stopped and listened, convinced that someone was pacing my steps just out of sight. When I turned, the trees stood motionless. Nothing moved, nothing made a sound. It was easy to laugh it off in the daylight, just nerves, just exhaustion. That first night I set up camp, I told myself it was going to be like any other camping trip. The first night, the fire popped and cracked, throwing sparks into the air. The sky above the canopy was scattered with stars, and for a while, I felt at peace. I ate, I wrote in my journal, and I stretched out in my tent. However, sometime in the night, I woke. At first, I didn't know why. The fire had died down to a glow. The air had grown colder. Then I heard it. A slow crunch of leaves, deliberate, steady, circling just outside the reach of the firelight. I held my breath. The sound stopped instantly. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a deer nosing around the campsite, but something about it felt off. Too heavy for a raccoon, too careful for a deer. I waited, heart pounding, until the silence pressed in from every side. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep, convincing myself it was nothing. But a part of me knew better. By the second night, the feeling had grown stronger. During the day, I caught strange glimpses in the distance, shapes where no one should be. I would stop to look, only to find empty woods. But that night, after the fire settled into a low flame, I woke again. This time, I opened the flap of my tent and looked out. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks. Shadows shifted between the trees, tall and still. Then I saw them, 3 figures, standing just beyond the firelight, too far to make out their faces, too close to mistake for trees. Their eyes seemed to glow. I froze. They did not move. They did not speak. They only stood there, watching. I whispered into the night, asking if anyone was there, but there was no answer. My voice seemed to vanish into the forest, swallowed up before it could travel. I closed the tent flap and sat inside, clutching my sleeping bag as if it would somehow protect me. In the morning, there was no sign they had ever been there. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing. It should have calmed me, but it didn't. As I pushed on, the trail itself seemed to turn against me. I found stick figures hanging from branches woven from twigs and vines. I saw crude shapes scratched into the bark of trees. At one point, I thought I heard whistling, faint and distant, though I was certain I was alone. When night fell again, the watchers returned. This time, there were more of them, half a dozen at least, circling the campfire. Their eyes glowed faintly, catching light where no light should have reached. I sat awake, gripping the handle of my knife, trying not to blink. They did not step forward. They did not retreat. They simply stood, motionless, silent. It felt less like being stalked and more like being studied. I wanted to believe it was just creepy folklore come to life, a campfire story made real by exhaustion and fear. But every time I blinked, their eyes still burned from the darkness. The next day, I tried to escape. I woke early and pushed harder than ever, hoping to reach a road or a shelter before nightfall. My legs burned, my pack weighed heavily, but I refused to stop. Yet, something was wrong. Landmarks repeated themselves. A crooked tree, a mossy boulder, a split in the path I was sure I had already passed. The more I walked, the more the forest seemed to twist around me. It was as if the trail itself had shifted, pulling me deeper inside. Then the whistling returned, closer this time. That night, they returned, closer than before. Their eyes gleamed just yards away, reflections of my fading fire. I counted at least 9, maybe more. The glow was unblinking, patient. One figure tilted its head, slow and deliberate, as if curious. My skin crawled. I realized then they weren't just standing there by accident. They were waiting. Panic drove me into the dark. I left the fire, left the tent, left everything behind. My headlamp cut a narrow path through the trees as I stumbled forward. Behind me, branches snapped, not one at a time, but several, as if the watchers were moving too. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs threatened to give out. The forest felt endless, every turn the same as the last. My headlamp flickered, once, then again. In that dim stutter of light, I swore I saw them, a ring of glowing eyes just ahead. When the lamp steadied, the eyes were gone, but the dread remained. At last, I burst onto a Forest Service road, collapsing against the gravel. The silence that followed was almost worse than the chase. I couldn't tell if they had stopped following, or if they were standing just out of sight. Far back in the trees, faint points of light flickered, like lanterns moving between the branches. I turned and refused to look back again. I made it out. I don't know how, but I did. I don't hike anymore. The woods no longer feel safe, not after what I saw. Later, I learned that I am not the only one. Other hikers on the Appalachian Trail have told their own true stories, accounts of being followed, of glowing eyes in the dark, of figures that do not speak. Some dismiss it as tricks of the light or paranoia brought on by isolation. But if that were true, why do the details always match? Sometimes at night, when the wind is quiet and the trees are still, I find myself staring out my window. Just for a second, I think I see them again, a glimmer of pale eyes between the branches, watching, waiting. They said another hiker had gone missing, vanished without a trace. We saw the bulletin tacked to the trailhead board, his name, his photo, and the words, "Last seen 3 days ago. If you have information, contact authorities immediately." I remember my girlfriend staring at that flyer for a long time, her hands shoved in her jacket pockets, the faint wrinkle in her brow. She finally looked at me and said, "I don't know if we should do this today." "Just a day hike," I told her. "We'd be fine." I didn't know then how much I'd regret those words. From the first step, The silence felt eerie. You expect birdsong on a trail like this, woodpeckers tapping, sparrows darting, maybe even the rush of distant water. But the Appalachian forest that day felt muted, like the volume had been turned down. Even the sound of our boots on the dirt seemed swallowed by the trees. She walked close beside me, every so often glancing over her shoulder. I teased her at first, saying she looked like a kid afraid of the dark. But secretly, I knew what she meant. That sense that the trees weren't just standing there, they were leaning in, watching. At one point, I heard a sharp snap behind us, the unmistakable sound of a branch breaking. We both froze, craning our necks toward the trail we'd just come from. Nothing moved. I forced a grin. Probably a deer. She didn't laugh. She just pressed her lips tight and kept walking. A mile or two in, we found it. At first, I thought it was just trash, but as we got closer, I realized it was a whole campsite. A small tent, a backpack propped neatly against a tree. Cooking gear lay out on a flat rock, as if someone had been about to make dinner, but no person, no fire, no footprints in the soil. It looked less abandoned than paused, like someone had just stepped away and never come back. She whispered, "Do you think this was his?" I didn't answer right away, but I was thinking the same thing. The missing hiker from the flyer. We stood there for a long moment, the woods pressing in around us. Finally, I pulled out my phone. No signal. She tried hers. Same thing. "We should tell someone," she said. I nodded, but something about the scene felt staged, too neat. The backpack zipped shut, boots placed side by side. Not like someone got lost, more like someone left it there. I tried to push that thought down. "Let's turn around after another half mile," I told her. "See if the signal picks up." She didn't like it, I could tell, but she didn't argue. The decision to turn back should have been the end of it. We'd retrace our steps, get to the car before dark, and report what we'd seen. But then she stopped and said she needed a bathroom break. "Just wait here," she told me. "I'll be quick." I leaned against a tree, scrolling uselessly through my phone as if reception might magically appear. The forest hummed with faint insect noise, the first sound we'd heard in hours. A minute passed, then another. I called her name softly. No answer. I waited. Called again, louder this time. Silence. By the 5-minute mark, my chest was tight. I told myself she was fine, just taking longer than expected. But the longer I stood there, the louder the silence became. Finally, I pushed off the tree and went looking. Her jacket was gone from the trail. The brush where she'd stepped through was still swaying slightly, like it had only just been disturbed. I pushed in, calling her name again and again. The woods swallowed it up. No reply. The next half hour is a blur in my memory. I stumbled through the undergrowth, tripping over roots, tearing branches out of my way. "Where are you?" I shouted, my voice cracking. Every so often, I thought I heard something, leaves crunching, maybe her voice. But when I moved toward it, there was nothing. My heart pounded so loud it drowned out the forest. Paranoia set in quickly. Had she gotten lost? Was she hurt? Or had someone been waiting for us out here? I thought about that campsite, about how neat everything had been. My mind spiraled into dark places. Maybe whoever took that hiker was still out here. Maybe we'd stumbled into the same trap. And worse, maybe she was next. The shadows stretched longer as the sun dropped behind the trees. Every path I followed seemed to loop back on itself. My throat was raw from yelling her name. At one point, I stopped dead. I could swear I heard breathing. Not mine, not hers. Heavy, measured, just beyond the tree line. But when I spun around, nothing. I was close to giving up, to heading back to the trailhead for help when I heard it, my name. At first faint, then louder. And then she burst from the trees, her face pale, eyes wide with terror. "Run!" she screamed. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed her hand, and we tore down the trail, crashing through brush and roots, not caring how loud we were. Behind us came the unmistakable sound of pursuit. Heavy footsteps pound the earth, branches snapping in quick succession. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but the thought of slowing down was worse than death. She stumbled once, and I yanked her up, dragging her along. The sounds behind us grew louder, closer, until I could hear the rasp of breath that wasn't mine or hers. We didn't stop until the trees thinned and the trail widened into the parking lot. The sight of our car sitting there in the fading daylight felt like salvation. The footsteps stopped. The woods behind us fell silent. We collapsed by the car, gasping, clutching each other. Neither of us dared to look back. We drove straight to the ranger station. Breathless, panicked, we told them everything. The abandoned campsite, the missing hiker, the chase. Search teams went out that night. They scoured the area with dogs and helicopters, but found nothing. No tent, no backpack, no trace. The missing hiker from the flyer was never recovered. His body was never found. Sometimes, when I lie awake at night, I replay the sound of those footsteps closing in. I imagine the face I never saw, the one just behind us in the dark. The Appalachian Trail has a way of swallowing people whole, and not everyone gets away. I do not scare easily. I have hiked the Appalachian Trail in thick fog, through thunderstorms, and across stretches so empty you start to wonder if you are the only person alive. Out here in the Appalachian Mountains, you learn that the trail plays tricks on you. Tree shadows look like faces, owls sound like something stalking you, and exhaustion makes you see things that cannot be real. But there is one story I never tell unless someone presses me. One memory that sits like a weight in my chest. It happened near Thurmond, West Virginia, a coal town that has been abandoned for nearly a century. You can still visit it, still walk through the remnants of buildings and tracks that once carried thousands of tons of coal. Hikers share scary stories about it, mostly as campfire fun. Ghost miners, lights in windows, voices calling your name. I never believed any of it. But then I saw her, and when she screamed, the ground beneath me moved. I had been hiking solo for a week by then, moving north on the Appalachian Trail. That stretch of trail cuts through ridges with views that feel endless. The mountains fold into each other, layer after layer, fading into blue haze. On clear days, like the one I had, the sky feels like it might go on forever. It was late afternoon. The sun was lowering, but I still had hours of daylight. My legs were sore but steady, and I had fallen into that rhythm where hiking feels automatic. My boots crunched on the dirt, my poles clicked against the stones, and the sound of the forest filled in the rest. Only, it did not sound right. The Appalachian Mountains are never truly quiet. Even on still days, you hear birds calling, insects buzzing, small animals rustling in the brush. But this stretch of trail felt muted, like the sound had been drained from the world. The air itself carried a faint scent I couldn't place at first. It reminded me of smoke, though no campfires burned nearby. The trail marker said I was only a few miles from Thurmond. I had not planned to stop in the ghost town, but I knew its history. Miners had worked themselves to death in those hills. Families had lived in clapboard houses until the coal ran out and the jobs disappeared. What was left was a hollow place, where life once was. I should have expected the forest to feel different there. I should have known better than to ignore it. I saw her on the ridgeline ahead. At first, she looked like another hiker, small and slight, moving slowly along the trail. But as I drew closer, I realized she was not walking. She was standing still. Her hair caught the light before anything else did. She wore a pale dress, old-fashioned, its hem torn and dirty, smudged with streaks of black. Her bare feet were planted on the packed earth of the trail, toes darkened by coal dust, and in her hands she held a lantern. It should not have been burning in broad daylight, but it was. The little flame inside flickered with an unnatural brightness, steady and strong against the breeze. For a long moment, I thought she was some lost girl who had wandered away from a house nearby, though I knew in my gut that there were no houses this far up the mountain. The Appalachian Trail comes close to Thurmond, but Thurmond is nothing but memory and ruin. There were no families left, no children playing, no reason for a girl with a lantern to be here. Still, I called out, "Hey, are you all right?" My voice carried far too loudly. The trees seemed to throw it back at me, as if I had shouted into a canyon. She did not move at first. Then, slowly, she set her gaze on me. Her eyes were wide and pale. Coal dust streaked her cheeks. She looked like a child who had crawled out of the mine shafts below Thurmond and never found her way back. I should have walked away. I should have ignored the urge to speak. But before I could even draw another breath, she screamed. The scream ripped the world apart. It was the cry of something unnatural, maybe even supernatural. A banshee out of old horror stories. The sound tore through the air and shook in my bones. The forest did not echo it so much as it fractured beneath it. The trees bent and warped as though I was seeing them through water. The ground heaved under my boots. My balance collapsed, and I stumbled, clawing at the dirt to keep from falling. Colors drained and reformed. Sunlight flickered as though clouds were racing overhead, though the sky had been clear. I heard voices layered into the scream. Men shouting, picks striking rock, coughing that rattled deep in lungs. The sounds of the mines. Everywhere I looked, the forest warped into something else. Buildings flickered in and out of existence. The outline of clapboard houses and coal tipples flashing between the trees. Lanterns swung in the air, glowing faintly even in the brightness of day. For seconds at a time, I was not in the forest at all, but in the middle of Thurmond, as it might have been a century ago, crowded with people who did not see me. I staggered down the trail, but the trail itself twisted. North and south no longer meant anything. The blazes on the trees stretched like liquid, running and dripping before my eyes. At one point, I swear I saw her again, not standing still, but walking toward me, her bare feet leaving smudges of black dust on the leaves. The lantern she carried pulsed with every step, brightening and dimming in rhythm with her breath. Her mouth was still open as though the scream never ended. I covered my ears, but it made no difference. The sound was inside me now. The scream was not something I was hearing. It was something I was living through. I do not know how long it lasted. Minutes, maybe. Or maybe I spent an eternity in that warped forest, stumbling through past and present, mine and mountain. When the world finally snapped back into place, I was on my knees, breath ragged, palms scraped against the rocks. The trail was solid beneath me again. The sunlight was steady. The trees stood straight. The girl was gone. But the smell of coal smoke still lingered in the air, faint and acrid, clinging to my throat. For the rest of that day, I hiked with my heart thudding in my chest. Every time I rounded a bend, I expected to see her waiting. Every flicker of shadow made me flinch. I kept looking for the lantern flame in the trees, terrified it would flare again. That night, I dreamed of her, She stood outside my tent, coal dust streaked across her pale face, lantern in her hand. She did not scream in the dream. She only whispered. And when I woke, I could still hear it, faint, like an echo inside my ears. I met other hikers the next day. They were confused, frustrated. They said they had lost their bearings on the trail, that their compasses had spun wildly for a short stretch. They laughed it off as a magnetic rock, as a manifestation of the weirdness of the mountains. I laughed too, but my voice shook. They did not mention a girl. They had not seen the coal dust on her cheeks, had not heard the scream that shattered everything solid. I finished that section of the Appalachian Trail with numbness. My body moved, but my thoughts were locked back on that ridgeline, back on the child who had wandered from the ruins of Thurmond and found her way onto the trail. Even now, years later, when I tell myself, it must have been exhaustion or some hallucination brought on by miles of hiking, I cannot make myself believe it. I know what I saw. She was real. The coal dust was real. The lantern burned with fire that should not have existed in daylight. And sometimes, when storms build in the Appalachian Mountains, when the wind rattles branches and the horizon flickers with heat lightning, I hear her again. Not the scream, but the whisper from my dream. A voice carried just beyond reach, calling me back to the trail.